So, hi everyone, welcome to today's panel session. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. I'm Gillian Docherty, I'm CEO of the Data Lab, and I'm today's panel host, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by four amazing panellists: Amanda Brock from Open UK, John Fitzgerald from SCVO, Teresa Shearer from Enable Scotland, and Alice Petrova from AI for Good. Welcome to you all. I'm going to come round and get you to do just a brief introduction to yourself for the audience today, and then we're going to dive right in. So Amanda, let's come to you first.
Thanks very much, Gillian. I'm Amanda Brock. I am a Scot based down in London, and I'm CEO of Open UK. I spent about 25 years, quarter of a century, as a lawyer, mostly in the tech sector, before I moved into a CEO role. And I've been CEO of Open UK for about 18 months. We're the industry organisation for Open, the business of Open in the UK, and that's open source software, hardware and data.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amanda. And John.
Hi, thanks for having me on the panel. I'm John Fitzgerald at SCVO, and I work in what we call digital evolution, which basically means helping the voluntary sector get to grips with tech in all its forms so they can achieve more impact. Before SCVO, I spent about 15 years in charities, small and large, trying to make tech work from an operational side. It's great to be here.
And Teresa.
Hi, Gillian Shearer, Chief Executive of Enable Scotland. Enable Scotland is one of Scotland's most impactful charities. We work in three specific areas. We have a learning disability charity which works in communities with people with learning disabilities. We also have a health and social care arm, and we have an employability training and skills arm. What most people don't know about our organisation is that actually the health and social care and the education and training arms are two of the largest organisations in Scotland. In any sector. We employ 2,500 people, and we have an annual income of 60 million, which puts us in quite a scale for charities in Scotland. But at our heart, we're a charity connecting people and fighting for equality for people with learning disabilities.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Teresa. And Alice.
Hi, my name is Alice. I work for AI for Good. AI for Good is a social enterprise that builds AI-powered, sustainable, ethical, and scalable technology for the most vulnerable and underserved. We work in many various areas, like from domestic violence to sexual and reproductive health to education and future of work in many regions of the world, from India to South Africa to UK, US, Spain, you name it. And basically, my experience in AI started when I first joined the all-party parliamentary group on AI in the UK Parliament. And we were coordinating the large group of industry, basically experts, different type of academics and people that are very knowledgeable about AI, even before it became a trend. And we're exploring the ethics and implications of AI on wider kind of areas of life, from trade to economy to education. And basically this is where my passion for AI grew. And obviously I had a lot of experience working with different non-governmental organizations, charities, also public organizations. And this is what I decided to do. So to apply this powerful and yet unexplored technology for good. So yeah, this is what basically brings me to AI for Good.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So today we're really looking at, the Tech for Good ecosystem has done a great job in response to the crisis. The work of the Scottish Tech Army and broader, those involved in that Tech for Good ecosystem, which you all are, really helped a lot. But there are big challenges ahead. We're only just now starting to look at potentially coming through the pandemic, and that may be many months and potentially years to come, certainly from economy and society perspective. So there are big challenges ahead. And so if we want to create that step change in impact that delivers Tech for Good, the ecosystem in Scotland that delivers that, what we'd like to talk about is scalability. We'd like to talk about capacity building and the ecosystem and the barriers to acceptance. So, John, let me come to you first. You work and see the work of a lot of the voluntary sector and the third sector and engaged, with the Scottish Tech Army and its impact in addressing some of the challenges from the pandemic. Share with us some of your thoughts on on those challenges ahead, and what do you think we need to do?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think there is really a bit of a before, during, and after. So SCVO has been in the Tech for Good space for probably about 5 years, and for a lot of that time, we were exploring with the sector what was the most relevant parts of digital technology that could really help the sector achieve more impact. So we did things like our Senior Leaders Program, our digital checkup, and that was reaching probably in the high hundreds of organizations per year. And before the pandemic, the discussion was very much about what is relevant for us. We have to have that conversation over and over again about why does our organization need to be digital? And of course, that changed hugely during the pandemic, where we went to a week where everybody wanted to be digital all at once. And it was really impressive to see the speed of response, both of the sector itself and of other volunteers like the Scottish Tech Army and all kinds of different agencies coming in to help the sector make so many changes so quickly. And I think what we're looking at now as the dust settles is, what does the longer term look like? So how do services stay high quality over time? How do organizations ensure that any gains they've made are not just a short-term high watermark, but something that can keep delivering for people over the longer term?
And Teresa, you've been working, with all of the people that Enable Scotland's helped for many years, pre-pandemic, and will continue through the pandemic and beyond. How do you think we can evolve the Tech for Good ecosystem, and what barriers do you think we need to make sure either stay down or come down to maximise the impact that that ecosystem can have?
So you're absolutely right, Gillian, to talk about pre-pandemic, and I think that's really important for us. So John mentioned that a lot of organisations and charities in particular became digital out of that necessity of the pandemic. So the switch, basically, the pandemic meant everyone had to work from home, or as much as possible work from home. We'd actually invested in the previous 2 years in a whole digital modernisation programme. So we didn't do it with a pandemic in mind, but we designed something that we wanted to be fit for future purpose. So when the pandemic hit, we already had 1,800 of our frontline staff at the front line in local communities, working with digital technology, having data, having the hardware, the software, and having the training and the skills within which to use it. Our Go Live programme and our rollout literally finished 4 weeks before the pandemic. So that was great for Enable Scotland, but I don't think that we're necessarily typical of lots of other organisations who are working in that space. And indeed, if I can quote, if you talk about barriers, one of my very good friends and fellow CEOs said to me recently, I've heard a rumour that you've given everyone mobile phones and technology and you've given them free data. And I said, well, it's not a rumour, it's true. And he said, how can you afford to do that? And I said, well, how can you afford not to do that? So the barrier is really this idea about digital being so expensive, so exclusive, particularly when it comes to frontline delivery. Not when it comes to sort of professionals, because there's an expectation that professionals will have that technology and will be able to work from home and work smartly and work more flexibly. But actually at the front line, at the coalface where we most need our charities to be working in our communities, that's one of the biggest barriers. So for me, it's around how you, one, get people to acknowledge there is no going back. In fact, there's only going forward. And two, ensure that the cost for charities who are finding the current situation difficult and will find a post-pandemic financial environment much more difficult, how can we work with the cost of that so that each charity in Scotland, all 24,000 of them, are not duplicating the cost of implementation time and time and time again?
So it's a really interesting point, that reinventing the wheel. Does every single, reinvent the processes, what tools they use, what techniques they use. And Amanda, coming to you and the amazing work that you do at Open UK and the importance of open software, open hardware and sharing, you're a huge advocate for that, and your organisation as well. How important do you think that is to support that Tech for Good ecosystem, the charities that operate in it, the groups, the individuals, because they're not all charities. Sometimes they could be community groups that don't have a legal setup. how do we support them, whether using open technology or indeed reusable assets, training guides, support?
Yeah.
Share us what your thoughts are on that.
It's really interesting because I'm listening to everybody talking, and you're coming from such a different place from us, and yet we're all part of this Tech for Good movement. And within Open UK, we look to the open source software development, the open hardware and open data communities. Most of us have been sat at home for years, and we've worked in this remote way, and we know how to do it. And to be quite honest, as a friend said to me, during the pandemic, we stopped working from home and we started living at work. And the way that you work at home shifted, and not for good, really. And I think there's a lot of learning to be had around not just enabling people with giving them the technologies, but ways of collaborating and ways of working that are much more human than a lot of what we've seen in this, really accelerated transformation. I think somebody said to me that last year we went through 5 years worth of digital transformation in 3 months. And like, Teresa was lucky she was ahead of the curve, but like her, organizations were doing this at pace, and they were doing it in ways that weren't always thought through in terms of the best investment. So I hear a lot of pushback when the governments talk about giving kids iPads, because they're not necessarily the cheapest way of getting tablet devices into schools, but it's a very singular focus on that proprietary kit. And there actually might be ways that we could see, if we were a little bit broader in our procurement of those tools, those devices, and the different resources, that we could actually access more for more. When we look at code bases now, Teresa, when we started this conversation, we talked about levels of technical understanding, right? So I would say to you, do you use open source? And I'm guessing your response is probably going to be no, or I don't know. Could be wrong.
No, my response would be no. So you're right. I do know what that is. I'm not that technically incompetent, but thanks for checking in.
I want you to actually be right about that. And this is one of the things that we've been going through with a lot of organizations, is that, and for years, many don't even know they're using it.
Yeah.
If you're sitting there using the internet, if you're sitting using cloud environments, I think 90% of the software stacks include it. 70% of code now is open.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a whole load more that we can leverage there that we're not, by collaborating. And I think some of the collaboration learning that we've got, we can bring to the more of the public sector, more of the charitable sector than we are. And we're seeing adoption, just not at pace, or we're seeing this hidden adoption where they don't really understand that that's what they're doing. And I think there's a huge facilitation and cost saving that we can be part of working with them. I also think if you can get to the stage where you're opening up the data as well, you're allowing for more collaboration and more movement, and removing some of the lock-in that stops that cost saving.
And just some of the points she covered there at the end in terms of opening up some of the data and the collaboration, never are two more fundamental things needed if you're going to do AI for good. Isn't that right, Alice?
Absolutely, yes. And for us, it's kind of like a journey that we take not just our users, but our partners, our charities and organizations that we work with. So we have to unpack what this seemingly difficult and complex technology actually means in real life, and how to interact with it on a daily basis, and not just like unpack, but also simplify and make it like really kind of like part of their day-to-day activities, to break it down, make it really simple, make it really kind of like transparent in terms of understanding the outcomes, and making sure that you can actually control them somehow, so there is some human in the loop in this process. So as we generally kind of like see in this, working with the social sector, there's a lot less appetite for technology, and specifically like AI, because the charities generally see this technology as a risk factor rather than like a benefit or an opportunity. So it's really hard to kind of like convince them to actually use it. And when you obviously start interacting with them, they want to go for something like nice and shiny and like the latest, state-of-the-art technology out there. So like GPT-3 is like in minds of a lot of people that we interact with. But we actually kind of like try to have a very kind of diplomatic approach here, but to explain to them that this, technologies with vast capabilities and like really kind of powerful ones, and not necessarily what we need in specifically like humanitarian aid or international development sectors, because you never know the outcomes. You cannot really control them. So like at this point of time, we haven't opened the black box. So we don't kind of like we don't advise them to use this complex technologies. We try to go for something very simple. And usually when we work in the area of conversational AI, so we build like chatbots for charities in different like taboo areas. We start with a very simple implementation. So not even like using AI, but just to generate like data and have first conversation, and just to see, you know, whether their users, their beneficiaries are actually getting some, you know, improvement in life conditions and life situations. So we try like very simple implementations first, and then if everything works out as we planned and the charity really likes the outcomes and the users are really satisfied with how their kind of like experience is going, then we go for something slightly more sophisticated, just literally one level up. But, you know, step by step, we try to make it very slowly, very kind of like holding their hand, like making sure that, you know, the charity understands everything and they can manage it on their own. So even if like one day, for example, they won't have, you know, the funding available for, you know, this chatbot support and maintenance, they can easily do it on their own. So not being dependent on like technology advisors and technology companies. And it's kind of like the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is always to take them on a journey with us, make sure that they build this internal capacity and they understand how to manage it with their own resources, and then kind of like let them go and make sure that there's some impact as well along the way.
You bring up some really interesting points about going for the shiny thing and the latest, you know, most complex, you know, sophisticated, you know, tool almost. You know, you can say AI is another tool in our toolbox to use, but at its fundamental heart, you know, digitization and the journey that many in the ecosystem have gone through over the last year. John, the impact of digitization and what you've seen over the last year, I think the key is how do we scale that to enable people to go to the next step and the follow-on step and the follow-on step in their journey, so that actually they're in a position to leverage some of the AI for good technology and capability that Alice just talked about? Yeah,
that's a really good point. And I think a thing to emphasize is that need to start with those simple foundations. So like Teresa flagged when she was speaking about her own organization, that's a really large organization by voluntary sector standards. And actually the vast majority of the voluntary sector, particularly here in Scotland, is really small organizations, like micro SMEs. You know, they're more like, say, local shops in terms of their amount of budget, amount of staff capacity. And I think that's a big challenge, because what you want to do, like I think we're all in agreement, that is to give the voluntary sector some agency and some ability to shape what tech can do. And that is quite difficult if you've not got dedicated technologists in an organization. If you're a really small setup, you're not going to have an IT team or a dedicated digital team. You're going to be relying on people just applying layperson's knowledge. And I think for me, that means at the moment, often a really common recommendation is using some off-the-shelf tools. So not going and seeking out something that requires lots of configuration or really sophisticated understanding, but just something that's tried and tested, because that enables you to get some impact straight away. And like a really trivial example in the pandemic time was people using off-the-shelf video platforms to basically enable meetups that couldn't have happened otherwise. Now, there are obviously questions around, is every video conferencing product delivering the best value? Is it the most safe and secure? You need to have those considerations in mind. But at the same time, if you're a tiny community group, you need something that you can just work with. And I think the main thing we'd often come back to is user needs. So both the needs of people that are accessing a service, you need to have that front and foremost, but also the people that are going to be using the technology day to day. As Alice said, you need to think of the long-term legacy. So you don't want something that works brilliantly on day one, but then 6 months later, people in the organization can no longer get the benefit from it. And I do think that when organizations get up to speed with some basic technology, you know, they're starting to do good user-centered service design, they're using cloud-based technology well, that can get them to a kind of critical tipping point where they get extra capacity, because with the same size of team, they can maybe reach more people or work more quickly, and then they can hopefully carve out some space to reshape the way that they work at the same time.
Yeah. Before I come to you, Teresa, so you know I'm coming to you next, but I'm going to encourage the audience, get your thinking caps on. I'm sure you've got some amazing questions for the panel. So get ready and get them into the chat function, because we're going to give you the chance to ask the panel those questions. So Teresa, you mentioned there earlier on about how fortunate you were in the size and the scale of the work that you do and the team that you have. And John just touched the other end, that kind of micro voluntary sector, I guess lack of capacity, potentially lack of skills, maybe experience, particularly in digitization and tools. If you had a magic wand and you could take everyone to 5 steps up on the digitization journey, what would you use your magic wand for?
So I think in terms of what I would like to do, the vision, it would be that what we've done for our frontline staff and what charities have done for their frontline staff to make that digital technology accessible for the people we serve, so for our customer base. So I think as charities and as community groups, we have done brilliant work in communications, in talking to each other and equipping our frontline staff. But the magic wand, the secret sauce, would be those people that we work for and we serve. How do we really ensure that they get the maximum benefit from that technology? And that for us as an organisation that deals with people with learning disabilities, acquired brain injuries, mental health issues, that's the next stage in the journey for us. We just feel as if we've taken the first step, Gillian. What we need to do is ensure that all of those lessons we then apply in the opposite direction, which is ensuring that the people that we serve absolutely get the best from technology. One thing about a magic wand in terms of how I would do it, we are slightly larger, and I do accept that, John, but we did not have the digital skills to implement the programme of work that we did. So we had to go to people like EY, we had to bring in contractors. I didn't know, Amanda, what an enterprise architect was, but I know we needed a couple of them. So it was that idea of, even with our size and scale, the magic wand has to be about these people are thin on the ground, they are very expensive, and they can choose where and when they want to work. So the magic wand would be creating that ecosystem of talent that would be willing to work across our sector in particular, Gillian. So benefit the people we serve and create a talent pool. And I know that's what Scottish Tech Army has started, but actually of people who will do it. And as much as I love EY, who will do it at a least cost basis would be great. And they have been brilliant to work with. So let me just be clear, they were great partners.
And so Amanda, do you want to come in on that in terms of the people side and maybe the kind of blueprint side that Teresa didn't know what an architect was, but she knew she needed some. How do we help those organisations and maybe those people that aren't as fortunate as Teresa that no one even need an architect in the first place?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point and a really good issue or question to pick up on. The idea of reuse and taking the existing work to scale, I think, is critical. When we see that implementation that Teresa's had and other organisations have had, the ability to scale it is absolutely critical. And a lot of that comes from transparency. And if we can get these things opened up and shared, I've spoken to a number of people across the public sector who end up coming to Open UK because they've worked on something that's been funded and they know it's a crying shame that other people are not going to have the advantage of taking that and reusing it. And I think the more that we can see those kind of collaborations and almost a recycling in line with the SDGs, in line with Digital Principle 6, where you're actually building something that is fit for a purpose, and that purpose is the charitable sector, the third sector, and then that can be scaled and contributed to and collaborated on an ongoing basis. We often don't realise in that open space just how many people in the UK are working in it. An awful lot of them aren't working for UK-based companies because we've done this digital remote thing for a long time. But there's a huge resource sitting here that we're not using enough of. And actually, I think you find that if we open this up a bit more to discussion, you'll find a lot of people willing to come in and work on that and help you build something that's recyclable. And I think that's going to be critical to it.
Excellent. Well, we're going to come to questions and conclude this section shortly, but final words to Alice, really. Scotland, you may have seen, you may not have seen, just at the end of March, published its AI strategy for the country, and the tagline is trustworthy, ethical and inclusive. And never more so is it relevant, those three things, and particularly in the tech for good sector. The robots aren't coming to take all our jobs. They are not going to come and fix this problem for us. What would you love to see from an AI perspective in supporting the tech for good ecosystem?
From an AI perspective, it's actually hard to say. Like, we are trying to build an ecosystem, just going back to what Teresa said, an ecosystem of talent in AI, because we know that, there are some organizations working in the data space, some organizations working in the tech for good space and digitization, but not so much in AI, because AI is still a luxury, I guess, for a lot of people. Data science, hiring a data scientist is like, the entire funding can go to just hiring one. So we are trying to create this pool, and in the area of AI, it's as you said, and as the strategy kind of like the Scottish strategy kind of like focuses on this area. It's really important that the people that are involved obviously focus on this exact area. So trustworthiness, fairness, inclusivity, and the approach that we use in AI for Good, then we actually try to educate our community, wider community of people that work in this area, is about applying principles of human-centered design, because we think that, if you start from a human, and if you put human in the center of your design process, so even before you start building any technology, you actually tackle a lot of issues already, from inclusivity to trustworthiness and bias, and making sure that your team is diverse, and kind of like will listen to all the different types of audiences before even like designing anything. So it's really important that we put human in the center and kind of like listen to our users or beneficiaries, and we try to address the challenges that they have and not the ones that we think they have. So it's really important to actually do user research and actually kind of understand the problem really well, and see the kind of try to foresee the unintended consequences, because a lot of people claim that no, let's first build something and then ask for forgiveness if it doesn't work. And you're like, no, not with AI, and not in the area of humanitarian aid, international development, social sector, healthcare, because it's just like the kind of cost is too high. The cost is human life, and you cannot go about it with just, let's build it, try it out, and see how it works then.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful. And this is kind of like the AI perspective, probably. So I think we definitely need to be more careful once this, powerful technology is entering our, different spheres of our life. We need to be more and more proactive in terms of seeking all the different, scenarios of what might go wrong, and planning for them and mitigating these risks even before we start building something.
Yeah. You remind me of a wonderful phrase that I heard once, is solve problems that matter, whether that's to you, the team you work in, the organisation or the country. So thank you all for this section. We're looking forward to coming to your questions shortly. It's been a real pleasure, and we hope to answer many of your questions. So please keep them coming in the chat, and looking forward to exploring that with the panel in the upcoming few minutes.